Before you actually go and quit architecture, I want you to take a deep breath, sit down and watch this video. You're probably feeling super tired and overwhelmed and anxious right now because you just want to quit architecture. I know this because I've been there myself, as other designers and architects have been. But I promise you, by the end of this video, you're going to look at architecture with a totally new light. Now, there's several reasons why you would want to quit architecture, and we're going to go through each one of them. Note that you might actually be suffering from a few of these combined together. The first one that you might be experiencing is a toxic workplace. You have a toxic environment that you work at, and it's totally draining your creativity and your drive for wanting to stay in architecture. You could also be suffering from the expectation versus reality, where school and media paint this beautiful picture of architecture, and then once you join the industry, you realize it's nothing like it. Now, I do have a whole video on this, so I'll link it in the description and I'll link it up here. And finally, it's boring work. You're doing all these tasks. You might not be terrible at it, but it's just boring. There's nothing interesting about it. So why would you want to stay in this career? Well, I'll tell you that luckily, each one of these examples has a pretty simple solution that you can apply before deciding I'm done. All right, so for those of you in this toxic environment, perhaps the partners or the owners talk to you in a way that belittle you. Maybe your project managers do not take the time to explain things and just give you attitude when you do ask questions. Maybe there's just like an unhealthy level of competition, not the good kind where you get motivated to work, but the bad kind where everybody's fighting over one position or something like that. In this case, first, it's crucial to see where exactly this toxicity is coming from and then decide if it's worth staying or leaving. If you've decided that you want to stay here, then you have to do two things. The first is that you have to set boundaries for yourself. And the second is that you have to communicate these boundaries. So as an example, let's say communication is what's causing this toxic environment, right? Let's say that your project managers get mad every time you ask a question. Well, then you have to set your boundaries and let them know, well, before we start a project, I need to know what the goals are, what the deadlines are. I need everything in a painted picture for me so that I could understand clearly. That's you setting your boundary and communicating your boundary, letting them know that you cannot work accurately. You cannot do good work if you don't understand the full scope of the problem and the solutions that need to be applied to these problems. This is something that I personally suffered with at the beginning of my career, where I was kind of like a pushover and I was a people pleaser. And this led the environment to become toxic because they took advantage of my niceness. And so I was always afraid of speaking up because I didn't want to sound like I wasn't professional. I didn't want to sound like I was complaining, and I didn't want to sound like I had a problem with the job. And so what ended up happening was that all these traits started to surface because I wasn't speaking up for myself. And that's why it's so important for you guys to communicate and let others know what your boundaries are, what your goals are in the terms of getting the work done. Now, some toxic traits that include like asking to be to stay late at work, after work often, coming in on weekends, or one of my favorites is when they make you feel like your life doesn't matter, only this job matters. And if you don't give it 120% and forget about your own life, then that means you don't care about architecture. These are all toxic traits. And it's really important to note, right, that it's not about the trait itself, but how the trait is presented to you. So I mentioned staying late. Staying late is okay. It's part of any career, to be honest with you. But not every single day, not very often. When you're asked to stay late, it's because some fluke happened, some unforeseen event caused you to the project to get delayed, and now you have to make up for it. And that's perfectly fine. We're a team. We have to get through this together. That's not the problem. The problem is when these firms are telling you you have to stay late every single day, every single weekend, making you feel bad, or not even every single, but often enough that you just don't feel comfortable, and they're not making it up to you. So there's a difference, right? There's a difference between firm A, who says probably 2 to 3 times a year, hey, we messed up. We need you guys to stay, please. And if you do, we're going to make it up to you guys. Maybe you guys can leave early. Maybe we'll give you some sort of compensation in the form of like a lunch together or something, whatever it is. Versus the other firm, which just takes advantage. You have to stay late. This is architecture. Deal with it. That is not true. These are toxic traits that are applied in a very toxic way. In essence, it's like these disorganized firms that are taking it out on you, making you clean up their mess. So it's very important that you speak up. Let them know what you're comfortable and not comfortable with. And hey, if they fire you over that, that's on them, not on you. So now let's talk about this expectation versus reality, right? Your firm has you doing details all day long. You hate details. You wanted to be a designer. That's why you got into this field. So what do you do in this case? Well, it's important to communicate again about what your goals are. Let your partners know, let your project managers know what exactly you want to achieve, right? If there's a lead designer, for example, in your firm, talk to them, ask if you can shadow them every once in a while, ask if you can meet with them every once in a while during lunch and get some pointers. How did they get to that point? Is there any way that you can get to a point, right? Sometimes you're in a small firm, they don't really have these resources. They don't have a lead designer or anything like that. One person wears multiple hats. So in this case, you should still communicate your ideas. Tell them what you want to achieve. And if they ridicule you or they mock you, then this is not the right firm for you, to be honest with you. You know it's a good firm when these firms take actionable steps to your concerns and your requests. Now, actionable doesn't mean like, all right, we're going to put you on this track that we developed directly for you, and you're going to be a designer in 3 months. That would be nice, obviously, but that's not the case. Actionable steps, what I mean by that is that they take you and they say, listen, I see how important this is for you, and we care about your growth in this company, so we want to help you with that. Let's investigate what we could do to help you, not be a designer right now, but help you put you on track so that every day you can learn something that gets you closer to that goal. Another idea, which I personally have done many times, is freelancing. Do work on the side that gets your creative juices flowing, that really piques your interest. So you could find clients that need renderings or design work, maybe sketches, maybe anything that really interests you, you do it on the side. Find those clients. This is also a good way to build your network, but it keeps your passion within architecture. But I will cover this all in another separate video talking about freelancing and architecture. So make sure you subscribe so that you get notified when I post that video. Now, sometimes we're afraid, like we don't want to ask for help, or we don't want to bother our, bosses, because we just look at them, they're busy, and who are we, right? That's what we might feel. And in my last job, I had a boss who I thought was amazing. He was like really smart man, really knowledgeable in the business side of architecture, which is something that we lack. And I was really interested in learning about that. So I would ask often to meet with him. I would ask his assistant, and his assistant would find space for me, and he would meet with me gladly. I never would have imagined someone like this would have taken their time to just like talk to me. And this was a pretty big firm. So the idea is that if you're afraid of getting mocked, getting ridiculed, or just them looking at you like, who are you? Forget that. You're important. So try to talk to these people, and you'd be surprised who will take time out of their day to try to help you. Now let's talk about the complexity of these projects that you're working on. Most of the time, the reason that the project is complex is not necessarily that the project itself is complex. It's the way that it's been presented to you is complex. So a lot of times a project manager will be having conversations with the owner's rep or the owner for weeks on end, understanding what is needed. And then they just tell you, hey, we need this door to change, right? As an example. And you have no idea why you're doing it. So maybe you change the door and then you present it. And then the manager's like, that wasn't what we needed. We need this and this. So the way that it's presented to you is what's complex, and it's confusing you as a whole. And if this is the case, then you need to communicate. Again, it's all about communication, but communicate to your project manager, communicate to the job captain, whoever is working on giving you the tasks. Talk to them. Say, hey, listen, I'd like to be put on these email chains. I won't respond, but I just want to see what's going on, because when changes happen, I want to know what's causing these changes. The big thing about architecture is trying to understand the big picture as much as possible. And firms tend to have a problem with this sometimes. Everything's moving so quickly and changes are happening. The contractor wants this and the engineer said that, and then you don't understand any of this because it's not getting to you. The only thing that's getting to you is the work. And not understanding is what ends up having you create crappy work and then feeling like you're just not good enough. So communicating the need, right? And there's nothing wrong with you saying this. Like, I want more information before I do these tasks. A lot of times it's complex because people don't really organize the projects correctly. Like, they don't break the project down into tasks correctly. So they'll tell you like, hey, I want you to spend the next week working on window schedules. And then you do that. And then 2 weeks later, it's like, we have this deadline on all the plans. Like, window schedules are not getting submit, only plans. And then you're like, dang, I wish I would have known that. So I could have just spent the last 2 weeks working on the plans instead of the window schedules. Now I have to stay late. You see, that's all disorganization. So you have to try your best to see what is needed and you have to try to organize it yourself. And then when they tell you, hey, do this, ask them, is that really what's important? Like, what's the next deadline? What are we submitting on the next deadline? So it's not that the work is complicated, it's the way that it's packaged and presented is complicated. And you need to talk and you need to communicate these problems. Remember, organizational issues are not a reflection of your capability. Now, kind of related to this is just boring architecture work, right? What do you do if that's the case that you're going through? Well, the first thing to recognize is that when you're bored working on architecture, a lot of us tend to say like architecture is boring because I find this work boring. But very many of us fail to realize that architecture is a very broad industry. And this is actually great news because you might be just doing project documentation, right? Schematic, design development, construction documentation, and you might not like that. And that's fine. There's so much other things that you can do. For example, think about what makes up architecture: the floor, the walls, the lights. All of these are individual companies. All of these are individual consultants. All of these are positions that you could merge into. That way you don't quit architecture. You just develop and evolve into something else and use your knowledge in architecture and your interest in this other aspect to do great work. Maybe you prefer project management, for example, but you don't want to manage architectural projects. Well, in that case, look into being an owner's rep. You can work for an owner and bridge the gap between architecture and owner and communicate. You know, a lot of times owners don't know how to communicate with architects and vice versa, because I mentioned before, architects are not business people and owners are. And so if you bridge that gap, you can now be a very, very important asset to these two entities. So quitting makes you toss everything that you've done away into the garbage, whereas just evolving and being smart and picking a different path is going to allow you to be an asset wherever you go. Now, let's talk about this decision to quit that you've landed on, right? I want you to imagine a graph. In the middle of this graph, there's a dot. That represents the start of the career of architecture. To the left of that is anybody that hasn't started yet but is interested. And to the right of that is everybody who already started and possibly finished and graduated and is working on licensure, whatever. Further away that you are from that dot to the right is the more amount of time, money, resources that you've spent on learning architecture. And the further you are away, the more impact that quitting is going to do on you as a person. So if you're to the left of this and you quit, you want to quit architecture, you never started, go ahead and quit. You're not losing much, if anything at all. But the more you are to the right of that, you just lose too much. It might not be worth it. Think about your journey in architecture as continuous evolution, right? Sometimes pivoting and changing path, even though we think is setting us back, is actually reigniting our passion and drive within the field and helping us do better. Now, if you've made it to this point and you're like, I'm done, nothing that you said helped me, I just want to quit architecture, I'm not happy. Well, then in that case, I just want to offer you good luck, and I want to tell you that you shouldn't feel bad. I know you probably feel terrible because you're quitting, but I don't want you to feel bad. A lot of great people have not necessarily quit, but just changed to something else completely different. You can't think of it as quitting. You just have to think of it as change. It's something different. This doesn't align with your needs and your wants. And so don't be scared. Just know that quitting is not the end, right? You're going to come out of this stronger. And I do wish you a lot of luck. Now, for those of you who are still here with me, remember, communication is the most important thing. Make sure that you understand what your needs are and your wants are, and communicate that with everybody around you. Forget about being mocked. Forget about being ridiculed. You are the most important thing in your own life. So make sure you express your needs to everybody and you see who aligns with those needs. Also, if you are going to stick around, make sure you subscribe to my channel, because I want to take architecture and tear it apart and look at the insides and show it to you guys. In other words, I want to expose architecture and I want to show all the struggles that we all face within this career, share it to you guys so that you guys could understand that there's always a way out and all of this happens for a reason. So good luck. Leave some comments if you have any questions. I'll see you in the next video. Keep designing.